I'm a programmer who likes to talk about programming, and I get excited about learning every day.
It's not about where the AI will take us, it's about us where we'll take the AI.
The best way to predict the future is to create it. That culture is not based on a country. Culture is not even based on a company. He said, "Your husband is the worst person I would ever work with." Great minds talk about ideas because when we become more mature, we think differently.
First of all, thanks a lot, Venkat, for doing this, and it's been a pleasure to have you on my podcast. First of all, I'll introduce myself. I am Kushal Judeja, the host of the Dead Spot, where I am being the dud here. And my fellow friend Puneet is also here. We both attended your sessions at GIDS Bangalore, and we were like in absolutely awe of your public speaking, your knowledge, and everything. And from that day, I really wanted to have you on my pod, and today the day has finally come, and I'm really excited to talk to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Let me also
Uh,
just add, when Kushal told me that he got a reward from you on that mail, so I was like, what? Like, it was really unbelievable for us. So it's nice to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
yes. From first of all, since I've seen your like multiple introduction everywhere, you are a award-winning author and you have been practicing like coding and in the computer science for a very long time. You also teach at university. You were like the first few people in the university to start teaching C++ since I. So if I ask from you, what would be your introduction? Like, how would you introduce yourself?
I'm a programmer who likes to talk about programming, and I get excited about learning every day. And so I like to learn and like to share what I learn. That's pretty much who I am.
Uh, that's really good. So we saw a few things about you like
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the GIDS itself, and it was really fascinating. Your take on the AI world, your take on the programming world, how we actually program things in real life. So in that, what I really wanted to know was there was this specific, if we jump right into it, there was a specific tweet by you in which you told about like it's not about where the AI will take us, it's about us where we'll take the AI. I really wanted to know more of your thoughts on that. What you really meant by that, and what do you really think where the AI is leading us, or we are leading the AI?
And that's what we need to find out. Peter Drucker said the best way to predict the future is to create it. And today there is two parallel things going on. One is this awe and fascination for AI, and unfortunately, simultaneously, the fear for what AI is producing. And I think the fear is on multiple fronts. In a way, the one fear of AI, which I would say is the lesser of the fear, is if anyone's job is in the line, if they're going to lose the job. But a bigger fear, I would even argue, is you could compare AI to innovations like gun creation. Are guns good or are guns bad? There is no easy way to debate that question.
Yes.
It as a tool, it is fantastic. As a weapon, it is terrible. Same thing you can talk about, nuclear energy. If it's an energy source, that's fantastic. If it's used as a weapon, it's terrible. And I think AI kind of falls in that category where we already have seen, and unfortunately, I think we haven't seen enough of it, is where we are benefiting from it, but also people are using it for negative things in various aspects of human life. And so the question is, how do we really deal with this in the long run? Part of the problem is even if we distill this down to the our lives as programmers, when we don't understand something entirely, then we fall a victim of it because we're not sure how to use it or how does it help us. And so it's really important. That's why to sit back and realize that AI is actually a tool. We need to control the tool and not the other way around, where the tool ends up controlling our thought or our actions or how we do things. And so that is really a call for action to say we need to really, uh, be proactive in asking where do we want to take this tool for the betterment of our field and various other aspects of human life to the large extent, rather than, oh, look, this is what the tool can do. So I'm going to be, it's kind of like, if you're a boat which is on a lake, but you don't have a way to direct the boat, it doesn't matter what direction you are going. You go in the direction of the wind. And so it's not about where AI is taking us that really matters. We need to really ask the question, where do we want to take this particular tool so that we can benefit from it? And at the same time, not, I was in a conference and somebody, paused and said, I don't know what to call. Is it he? Is it she? And I said, no, it's a it. It's a tool. So there's no reason to glorify this more than it need to be. And so there is no reason to treat it as something that is omnipresent. It's just a tool. And that's really where it begins to mess with people's mind because of the power it has. Is when there's a wake up, time to wake up and say, no, it's a tool. Let's step back and think about where do we want to take this tool.
So whenever we say we, would that be us who are using the tool, or would that be people who are developing the tool, or would be the third person, like who is kind of making something on that tool, using that tool, and like creating something else? So when we say we, uh, who's that we here? And
Collectively,
again,
every
on the
one
second
of
part,
us.
like how do
Right.
we, yeah. Mm.
Yeah, collectively, I would
So,
argue
mm,
collectively every single one of us, because the we here is the human against the tool. And as humans, we always play different roles, and sometimes we play multiple roles ourselves. It doesn't have to be you are in one camp all the time.
mm,
For example, I am currently a user of AI, but I'm also a critique of it to a certain extent.
mm,
But I'm also working with organizations that are focused on, how do we really provide the power to really make these tools work? So a single person may be involved in multiple things. That's not unusual for that to happen. And over time, somebody may shift between roles as well, or in a different context. On a day, somebody may be involved in, making these tools. On a different day or a different context, they may in turn be the user of the tool. So I think we, as collectively as humans, one of the problems we see with AI is it amplifies. I would say the problems we already have, and the
mm,
amplification is, remove AI from this equation for a minute. Um, when I was and I'm not suggesting we go back to the times I was a kid, but when I was in my decades ago,
mm,
we didn't have things like Google, so there was
mm,
no browsers when
mm,
I was in school, and we learned very differently, but we also worked very differently as well. And I'm extremely happy we have tools like Google and we have tools like Stack Overflow,
mm,
but there is a generation of developers who grew up with maybe Google and Stack Overflow. And when you are introduced to these tools versus your environment is made up of these tools, there
mm,
is a difference in your thought process.
mm,
And again, I'm not trying to generalize this as a generation that
mm,
is, in a certain way of thinking, because I would be very unfair to generalize that way. But I would say on an individual level, there are individuals, in spite of all the tools that are available, they focus on really learning the fundamentals. They focus on not just learning the fundamentals, but really being able to apply the fundamentals.
Mm,
To me, if you ask me, what's one of the most important skill of a programmer? You could
mm,
say, oh my gosh, that's data structures. Oh, you got to know
mm,
algorithms. You got to
mm,
know. You can list a lot of things that one has to know. But I would put at the very first of all of this is really critical thinking. Because
mm,
without critical thinking, it really doesn't matter what our knowledge is. You
mm,
can say knowledge is like, a lot of these things you know, but you don't know when to apply it and
mm,
when to maybe say, this is not the right time to really use this
mm,
particular knowledge because that's not going to serve us better. So that aspect of critical thinking is extremely important. Now, if the tools, avoid us from applying our critical thinking, then it's very problematic. And
mm,
again, that's why I say this is exasperated because you could Google away, you could look at Stack
mm,
Overflow, you can look at a solution and immediately apply that solution.
mm,
Or you can look at things in Google or Stack Overflow and say, wait a minute, does this really make
mm,
sense in this
mm,
context? Should I be
mm,
looking at something else instead? Is this the right path to go? So you're looking for ideas rather than saying, I'm going to just grab this. Somebody wrote something, I'm going to grab it and apply it. Now, take that to the next level. AI is really make things either really good or really worse, depending on whether you have that critical thinking or not.
mm,
For a person with that critical thinking, AI is fantastic because
mm,
it quickly throws seven ideas in front of you and you're able to discern between them and navigate.
mm,
For a person who doesn't have the critical thinking, it's very dangerous because the things it throws at you may not be really useful or valid, but you don't have the ability to discern between
mm,
what may be good and not what may not be the right approach. And then you become the victim of taking solutions in front of you.
mm,
And that is kind of where we got to be careful in terms of, generally speaking, humans in
mm,
general, is to understand that the capabilities of the tools are important to understand, but the limitations are important to understand as well. And if we don't have that understanding, it's like giving a
mm,
chainsaw to somebody who doesn't understand how a
mm,
chainsaw works. And it could be in two different directions. Somebody could take a chainsaw and apply it like they use a
mm,
normal saw. They don't get the benefit out of it. Or they take it and sling it and they
mm,
lose some parts of their body because they were not, safe with it. That's another extreme as well. So it's important for us to be able to be, I would say, cautiously
mm,
optimistic rather than being naive about these tools, and understand and ask the question, what are the results we are getting? How do we evaluate those?
mm,
That is still our
mm,
responsibility. We cannot simply put all our faith into a
mm.
tool because that's going to be a disaster waiting to happen.
So on this part, like when you said the critical thinking part is really important in a programmer or anyone who is using any tool in life. So the question arises, how do you develop a critical thinking in someone? Like, let's say if I'm starting out in software development, for an example, and I see that I can get answers very quickly. I can just put in my problems and put in my logs that I'm facing the issues at, and then send it to AI, and like it gives me the result. Starting on the critical thinking part is a hard job. Like it's difficult. Like how do we really start on this part? Like, since let's say I'm starting as a programmer, and I have the access to AI or like any chat GPT, whatever AI that I'm using. So how do we begin on the critical thinking part? Like, should I go through the docs part, or like, how do I develop that?
Well, but newness doesn't really have any relevance to critical thinking because it's a lot more fundamental.
Mm,
And I would
mm,
I would not state that it's hard because that's an easy way to kind of say maybe that's not something that most of us should can do or should do. I would even say that's the fundamental to being an intelligent human being is to have that critical thinking. And without that, and critical thinking has absolutely nothing with programming or documentation or any particular thing. It's about an existence of a human being is always information is presented towards you. And when information is presented to you, how do you consume that information? Do you accept it blindly, or are you desperate to just fall prey to it and start implementing it? Or do you step back and ask the question, what are the pros and cons of things? So this is a fundamental. Some of this can happen from early ages of human development, right? This could be result of the environment that we are in. Sometimes we have, parents, guardians, relatives who give us that, a framework where we are allowed to challenge, we are allowed to question things. There's a saying, right? Terrible too, because at 2 years of age, kids ask why all the time. And the society works really hard to say shut up, and that is one of the problems, right? So we as a society try to limit on the nature that actually is extremely important later in lives. Critical thinking is something that requires you to challenge notions, require you to redefine and form your own opinion and ideas. I'll give you two examples of this. One is this was decades ago when my children are all grown up now, but my son was, I'm going to say maybe he was 7 or 8 years old, maybe a little younger than that, maybe 6 or something like that. So we had this little electronic device that we had bought that you can program, and you can configure it, and then you can program it, and then you can let it run. And here, as a programmer dad, I want to teach my son about algorithm. This is when children prove you they're smarter than you, and you begin to accept them as they are. So I went to him and I said, hey, you can program this stuff, right? And like, yeah, dad, I can program this. It's a drag and drop programming capability. And I told him, your mission is to program it so that when you put it on the floor and you press this button, it should move to a particular distance. I mean, within minutes, he masters it, right? He drags and drops it, click like it, go for it, it works. And then I told him, all right, I'm going to go to work, upstairs. I've got some things to do. I might be done in an hour. I'm going to come back. And your mission is to program this little, truck so that it goes from here. I drew a line on the floor, and I said it goes from here and it almost hits the wall, but doesn't hit the wall. And then it should reverse and come back to where it started. And he's like, okay, so you want me to go forward, not hit the wall, but go near it and reverse back to where I started. Yep, that's exactly what I want to do. Because my goal was for him to come and say, oh my gosh, how do I do this detection of hitting the wall,
The
right?
what?
To use the sensors and stuff like that. So an hour goes by, and he was just sitting there and doing some stuff. And I said, hey, you were supposed to work on this, and I what's going on? And he's like, oh, I got that done a few minutes after you left, but I know you're busy. I didn't want to bother you. I thought I will show it to you when you come back. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, you're done. Yeah, it works. Nothing big deal. It works. So I'm like, I want to see it. So he puts it on the floor, presses the button, and sure enough, it goes all the way to the wall, but doesn't hit it and reverses back, comes to exactly where it started. So I am like, how did you make this work? Because you didn't ask for help, and there are techniques that are beyond your scope. So what did you do? And he's like, oh, dad, come on, give me something more
Double
challenging. This is
distance.
trivial. And I'm like, you got to tell me what you did. And he's like, well, you said it's got to go almost hit the wall, but not to hit the wall. So I sat here thinking, and I realized I can measure the time it takes from here to go near the wall. And once I measured the time, I keyed it in and said, go forward for that many seconds. And I said, stop and reverse for those many seconds. So trivially, it goes forward for a few seconds and comes back the same way for a few seconds. Problem done. And I looked at him and said, I don't think I need to teach you anything more. You're on your own and you'll be just fine in your life. And the point is to be able to devise solutions, and it doesn't have to be the solution you think is right, but to come up with a different solution and to be able to reason about it, right? So that becomes very critical, right? So this is at a very small kid level. In my case, I had a client call me up and said, we're using this particular framework. And I was not using that framework at all at that time. And they said, we want you to come and help us with this framework and make some recommendations. And I'm like, oh, so this is something they're using. I've not used it. So for the very first time ever, I am looking at the framework. And immediately my thoughts are, oh my gosh, what a terrible idea this is. And I am starting to tell them, these are the stuff you should never use. And they're like, we use this all the time. Well, you shouldn't use this because here are the drawbacks of using it. Here's why fundamentally this is terrible idea from software design point of view. And I'm thinking, why is it that I'm angry about this solution when these people have been using the framework are using it all over? And fast forward a year later, that very features I've been complaining about were deprecated because they said this is terrible way of doing things. We should never do this. And to me, that to develop that sense is extremely important, right? The sense to critique things. And again, that doesn't mean you're right. It doesn't mean you're wrong, but to be able to even challenge that and question is something you can develop either from early on in your life, or you can develop the courage to start doing it. Not with a sense of arrogance, right? To say I'm going to challenge everything, that I'm the rebel. That's not the goal. But to really have that, sense of, I'm not going to just take it because it's given, but I'm going to ask the question, why is this better? What are the consequences of using it? What are the pros and cons? I often ask people, hey, you're doing it this way. What is a different way to do this? Are there other ways? Are there better ways? And that to me is the most important skill to develop. It's not about learning a library, but to really ask the question, why does this exist? What problem does it solve? And so we can develop critical thinking, if we are not in a rush to consume things, but instead to say, I'm going to accept these, I'm going to receive these, but I'm also going to challenge those and ask the question so I can understand why these things exist. Sometimes people say, oh my gosh, this is stupid. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. You say it's stupid, but if we really dig deeper, we can understand an appreciation as to why it was designed that way. And sometimes there's a good reason for it, sometimes there's none. But it's important to take the time to really understand if that is really a stupid decision that's been made, or it's not as bad as we think it is, when we understand the reasons behind such decisions were made. I think that is something, the more we develop that skill, the more we can sustain, especially in the world we live in, where things are moving fast and we got solutions or more and more things that appear in front of us. But if we don't have that sense, it's a trap we're going to keep falling into. I think that's going to be the distinction. It's not about whether you can use the tool that's going to decide how successful we are. It's the decision as to how effectively we are able to use the tool, right? Are we able to really direct the tool and navigate the tool, or are we just bouncing off the surface of what the tool is giving? I think that's where, so to me, I would argue critical thinking is even more important now than it was before. And one of the things that teams can help us is also to foster that quite a bit, is to say, hey, you're part of our team, but here are the ways we're going to challenge each other and question. I think that's something we need to cultivate in our teams as well.
So, on the lines of this, I had this doubt in the GIDS also. Like, you mentioned this line that you will always want people who questions you, who challenges you in a team. So, if we take that to a Indian atmosphere in a company, so whenever, let's say, you are challenging your leader, people leader, or your manager, so it sometimes kind of comes off on their ego, and they might take an offense that how can a junior employee or a junior developer is challenging me. So how do you tackle that instance, or how do we tackle that instance that, okay, now can we even say something about this in a public forum or not?
I'm of a firm belief that culture is not based on a country.
Hmm.
Culture is not even based on a company. Culture literally comes down to a team. I have worked in companies where anywhere in the world, it doesn't matter. I would be walking across the floor within the same company, and I would probably walk across three or four different cultures.
Hmm.
So it's a culture. You know what? I'll give you this. I was a student in India, and I'm talking 40 years ago, right? And when I was a student in India 40 years ago, I had a professor whom I'm still in contact with. I go see him, when I visit India. He still calls me, and we still speak 40 years later. And he always insisted that we call him by his first name, right? And he would sit there and say things, and it was expected we challenge him.
Hmm.
Uh, when my wife first met him, he said, "Your husband is the worst person I would ever work with, because everything I say gets challenged with him. And that's what I like about him," he said. And not that's not because I wanted to challenge, it's because he cultivated us the ability to challenge, right? I would spend uh, I was almost like a son to his family. I still go meet his wife, and she looks at me as a child of the family, because I was what, this 19 something, and I would go to their house, and she's like, "Venkat, when did you have your meal?" I'm like, "Auntie, I'm fine." "No, you're not fine. Sit down here now." And she would feed me with their children, right? That's the way it was. And I would sit there and hours on end work on my research. I had the opportunity to work on research in my undergrad program, and I would work on the research, and I would challenge him. So he taught me that it was important to challenge in a technical setting, right? And it was not, affecting his ego. In fact, it was more of his focus to build the field and to challenge and be able to create something that's innovative. So to me, that is culture that I am exposed to right there in the middle of India, right? So your culture is the group of people that you live with. I had people around me that said it's okay to challenge. To the same extent, I used to work in a company in Houston, and I can pretty much walk up to my boss and say anything I wanted. And in the same company, I was on loan to a different division. And again, right? It's not I went to a different country or even different company. We're in the same company, and I was on loan for 3 months. But once I went there, there was a strict hierarchy. I'll tell you what you should do, and you will do it. And I said, my boss, who was on the team I was on loan for, and I told them, "You're not going to have me in your team for long if this is the way you operate, because I'm a professional and I focus on technology, not on people stuff. So I'm not going to follow your command structure. So if you want me to help you, this is what is going to happen. If not, thank you. I'm going back to my own team." And to be have that courage to say, it's not about me and you. This is not a conflict between our egos. This is about the concept. Eleanor Roosevelt said something beautiful. She said she said, feeble minds talk about people, great minds talk about ideas. And that is something I always say. I'm not interested in you, right? As a human, your ego, because I'm not here to fight you. I am here to critique the ideas. And I'll tell you something unforgettable. I was in Norway, I was teaching a course, and there was this person in the room who was absolutely disagreeing with a lot of stuff I was saying. What's really worse is he was right most of the time, right? So we were in loggerhead for 8 hours during the day, and 5 o'clock, unforgettable experience. These are the things that make life interesting, right? So from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., we are in the stress, right? He disagrees with the ideas. He's not bad mouthing me. He's not saying you're stupid, right? He's like, well, wait a minute. You want to design it this way. I challenge you to think differently. Here's a better way to design it. So we finish at 5 o'clock. The room empties out, and he's still sitting there, and I'm putting my stuff away for the end of the evening. He comes to me and says, "Hey, Venkat." And I look at him and said, "Yup." And he said, "What's your plan for the evening?" I'm like, "What do you have in mind?" And he's like, "Well, I don't have anything on my calendar right now. And if you are free, I want to take you for dinner." And I'm looking at this guy. I'm like, "You want to take me out to dinner?" And he said, "That's what we do as professionals, right? Disagree on concepts and put that away and get along as humans." That's my view. I hope that's yours too. And I spent the next 2 hours with him in the restaurant, having a fantastic meal and talking for 2 hours about so many things outside of software design, and really got to know what an amazing human he really is. And that to me is really culture, right? So a true good culture is, I'm not taking this personal. You're not here to attack me. I'm not here to attack you, but we are going to argue about the concepts. You know what? Sometimes you're going to be right. Sometimes I'm going to be right. Sometimes we collectively are going to become right. And the key here is to discuss these things. And to a great extent, we can cultivate this culture among the teams that we work with. It doesn't matter, right? In what country we are in or what company that we work with. The same thing. I've had uncles who would tell me, "Go ahead and challenge me. You don't have to accept what you are told." And and I think the stronger a person is, the more interested they are in being challenged. The weaker a person is, the more defensive they often are. And again, that is something, and even as a junior developer, you can have this conversation and you can say, "Hey, I know you're more knowledgeable than me. My goal here is not to." This is something I learned from my son. This is I say children are great teachers to parents, in my opinion. He would start with these words. He would say, "Dad, I'm not trying to disagree with you." That's the way he would start his conversation, right? "Dad, I'm not trying to disagree with you. I want to present you some ideas, and that might be against your wishes, but I want you to hear me through and then decide what I should really do. And the decision is yours, but I want you to listen to me to present my options," he would say. And I'm like, "Kid, where did you learn to say these words, right?" Because now there's no way I cannot listen to him, because he kind of sets the stage for to making the case. I think we can do that as a junior programmer or junior developer on the team, to say, "Hey, you're the senior person, you make decisions. I'm not here to challenge you and against your wish, but I want to entertain the conversation on the technical topic." I think if we can engage our colleagues like so, I think we can really build a better culture rather than being a submissive culture where I do what I'm told, which actually increases the risk in general. Because, there's a story of back in the 80s. an airplane went down. And when the airplane went down, they were trying to analyze why the airplane went down. And they were looking at the data recorders. And I apologize for the analogy, given the situation we had in India a couple of days ago. So that my heart goes out to that. But this also is a life lesson for us to learn from, right? So this was a Korean airline that went down, and they were analyzing why it went down. And what they found out was that the co-pilot found out that the pilot was making a mistake. And but the co-pilot did not want to tell the pilot is making a mistake because he is senior. And again, our cultures, right? Indian culture, Korean cultures, where we are like, oh my gosh, they are senior, you better follow what they say. This is a problem because it's a life and death situation, not just for the person, but for a whole lot of passengers
That's
who
right.
are depending on you on the flight as well. So that's one of the things, that where you build this culture where you say, no, you really need to challenge these people. Don't worry about them being senior. It's because it's not about seniority, it's about life and death. In a corporate world, if you make a wrong decision, that costs money, that costs business, that results in a profit or loss, or even sustainability of a business. So when we illustrate those things and say, we are here for a greater goal, we tend to look at it very differently than to bring our egos into the mix. So it's a culture we should really foster and create more than anything else, I think.
I have a question around this. So you talked about challenging, right? In companies, where the development is really fast and, there's a race to, reach beat the market with the product. So how do we, present our challenges when we are in a race to, deliver the product? So there's not enough time to list down all the things, and, the focus is to get things done. Or, there's the analogy to fail fast, right? Do it wrong, but do it fast. So
It's really funny, right? If you don't have a lot of time, you want to do less, not do more. So if you ask the question, what's the minimum viable product we should focus on? What are the features that absolutely matters to the current release? Or should I pack a lot more into this? This is where we have to, at some point, ask the question about what is the cost. The cost of development, right? So let's learn from some experiences. Back in the 70s and 80s, Toyota used to make cars very quickly. And when they did, cars would come back with defects, and they would spend the time in fixing those defects. This is what I often call as a local optimization versus a global optimization. So imagine it takes me this amount of time and money to develop something. And then once I do, now it takes this much amount of time to maintain it in production. So if I look at the time to market and the time I'm spending in development, that's a very naive view, because as an organization, you're not spending this much time and money. You're spending this whole thing, right? From this
mm,
end all the way to here. So what Toyota figured out was, if they focus on better quality of what they develop, the problem is it's no longer taking this much time and effort. It's taking a little longer for them to do, right? So they're spending more time and effort than they did before. But in return, what they found was that fewer cars were coming back with defects. So their maintenance cost went down drastically. So now, when you look at the global optimization, right? So your goal is not to optimize one small area, your goal is to optimize overall, right? Globally. And in order to optimize globally, you may shrink the time and cost it takes globally, but for doing so, you may have to increase the time and cost in a certain area so it has a positive effect on another area. This requires maturity. This also requires holistic view. it also something we can learn from experiences. This actually goes back to more things than writing code. This is something I've been thinking about for quite a while. I always want to ask the question. So I want to say, I would say, succeed in the short term but sustain in the long term. I can tell you how many, not only companies, but individuals succeed in the short term, but don't sustain in the long term. For example, right? These are lessons we can learn. And some of us are fortunate to have adults around us when we are young to foster those thoughts. Sometimes they are parents, sometimes they are uncles and aunts, sometimes it's the friends and the professors. Somebody somewhere lights that little, you know, thought in your mind to say, I got to think differently, right? So one of the things I would say is, you get a job, you're making money, and so your immediate thought is, oh my gosh, I'm making all this money. I've got all these things I always wanted to buy. Well, if you go by, there's a statistic that more than 70% of Americans cannot pay for an emergency expense of $400 or more. So can you imagine that, right? There's a plumbing issue. You got to spend $400. You cannot afford it. That's 70% of people in the country, right? So the question you want to ask is, what's the reason for it? Well, you could say, my gosh, these people are living below the poverty level. No, 70% of the country is not living below the poverty level. They even have a statistic that says people who are making six-figure salary are living paycheck to paycheck. So what is going on here? The problem here is we are so good at focusing on the short term. I want to buy this. I want to buy this. I want to buy this. I want to charge my credit card and I want to buy it. So we quickly get into debt. And when you do, here's the outcome of it. 80% of Americans have not saved for retirement. Can you imagine 80% of the country doesn't have enough saving for retirement? They got $172,000 saved for retirement. $172,000 will not come even for a year of expenses once you retire. But why did they get to that situation? Because their eyes were on the short term.
Short term.
Same thing. You're saying, oh my gosh, my day is too busy. I hate the word busy. I'll tell you that. My day is busy. I've got this to do. I've got that to do. I got that to do. So I don't have time to exercise. Well, you spent your 20s not exercising. You spent your 30s not taking care of your health. You spent your 40s not caring about, your weight and your, general health. And then you come to 60 years of age and you find that your medical bills are very high because you have so many problems health wise. So, this is again a focus on the short term and not thinking about the long term. What we do at work is no different from that. We are like, hey, let's do sprint to sprint development. Hey, but wait a minute. What's your company spending on this product in terms of overall cost of maintaining it? That's not my problem, right? My focus is on getting this out faster. And at some point, we got to become more mature because when we become more mature, we think differently. And then we say, it's a trade-off. It's a balance we have to strike. I've got to spend money, but I got to invest for my retirement. I want to spend my time, but I got to exercise and take care of my health as well. I want to develop faster, but I cannot drop quality for doing it as well because all of these things have an impact on the long term. So the question I want to always ask is, what does this mean in the short term? What does this mean in the long term? In a in an individual, you are living, that's your life, your retirement, your health when you are older. And even there, most people are not able to make the right decision because they cannot visualize 40 years from now. With companies, it's even worse because the manager on the project today may quit and move elsewhere. So it's no longer their problem. And as a result, They drop the code and walk away, and the company is the one that is left with the product that cannot be maintained. How many times have I been to companies where they got a product they cannot maintain anymore? It's a crisis. And this is my life. I spend a lot of time on these companies. When you go in, they're like, rescue us. We don't know what to do. And you're like, wait a minute. You guys got into the situation not overnight. You dragged yourselves to this situation over the past 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. And now you have to suffering through the consequences of this. And in a great extent, the cost of digging themselves out is enormously expensive than what they could have done if they had paid attention to quality as they developed it. So I would say it really is part of immaturity. It's a part of carelessness. But mature teams work very differently than, unfortunately, right? Discipline, maturity, all of those are very much in shortage. That's not prevalent in a lot of people. You can be in an auditorium with 1,000 people. You can ask people to raise their hand. How many of you think exercising is good for health? Almost every hand will go up. Then you ask the question, how many of you actually exercise? Very few hands will go up. Why? Because most of us understand exercising is good, but we don't have the discipline or the commitment to do it. Why? Because we are focused on what is impulsive and immediate, the instant gratification. We don't have the maturity to step back and ask the question, what's going to be the impact of this in the long term? I think that's one of the places where we need to really become better over time.